Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This is episode 12 of the 2025 season, and in this one today, we are going to be looking at the results and kind of the events that happened during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which happened last weekend. I'm your host, Anwar, and in this episode, I'm going to be joined by Daniel and Callum, both returning guests, and Callum being president of the actual society, and another returning guest in James. Cool. The kind of place I want to start off with is what we thought of the race weekend as a whole. Did we find this an entertaining weekend, or did we find this one a little bit more of a boring set of events? I want to start with you, James.
Well, in terms of the weekend as a whole, I mean, it's a nice track just to see the cars zooming round. I feel it does lack a bit. It's quite good to see them go around the circuit. I don't know. I feel there's something a bit missing with the atmosphere. There don't seem to be many fans in the grandstand. You often get, and also I'm never a huge fan of night races. I just think they lack a bit of character. I just think you'd like to see more in the background if it was the day. But in terms of like the actual weekend itself, the actual on-track action, I mean, practice is practice, but it's never going to be thrilling. But quali, well, I thought quali was quite good. It was pretty exciting, particularly Q3. Had the drama of Lando binning it on the first one, and then Piastri and Verstappen so close, but 1,000th of a second separating them on the first ones. On the final ones, 100th of a second, so 1 split second separating the two of them. Pretty exciting. The race itself was not the most thrilling ever. I mean, you had the drama on the first lap, but from there, the result was inevitable, and there wasn't it. There was some on-track battling. We got Ferrari on the podium first time this year, but it was far from a thriller the rest of the race.
Daniel, Callum, what were your opinions and what would you rate out of 10 in terms of the actual race itself?
As a rating, probably down the middle, a 6 or a 7. Probably it wasn't a banger, like James said. The strategy was pretty straightforward. I mean, in the middle of the race, I was just getting up the strategy chart for Bahrain and just missing it dearly because that was peak strategy variation on that day, and we just didn't have that in Saudi Arabia. It was a clear-cut one stop. We never saw the softs, which was quite disappointing. No one really tried anything too aggressive except the bottom three trying to go long after pitting on the very first lap during the safety car, which was very random and was never going to work. So, but you know, it was something different, I guess. The buzzwords after the race were kind of dirty air. I think that's what killed a lot of the racing for me. We've seen good races at Jeddah in the past. 2022 had a great battle between Verstappen and Leclerc that was back and forth the whole time, and that's because they could follow each other closely. But now with so much downforce, they've got so much kind of turbulent air coming off them that it's just so hard to follow. Leclerc, for example, he said he had understeer behind Russell, but then when Russell boxed, the fronts kind of came alive and he could push again, which is kind of weird and not at all what we want to see Formula One coming to. So that was a shame from that angle. It kind of highlights the problems there. But it was a great race from those at the front, which I'm sure we'll get into. A bit of controversy too, which I don't mind at all.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Daniel on that one. I'm not sure I can really add too much more. Personally, I think I'm a really big fan of the Saudi Arabia circuit, a bit like Monaco, which is its constant challenge for the drivers, constantly next to the wall, very unforgiving, as we saw, for example, with Lando Norris in Q3 of qualifying. But I think the race was okay. We got a few moments of drama, a few overtaken moments, but certainly not our most exciting race of the season. But I think I would agree with it about a 6 or 7 out of 10. Some moments to talk about, but then other parts where it was kind of maybe dragging along a little bit as well.
James, if you were to rate it out of 10, what would you put your rating as?
6.
Cool. So we've got a few sixes, right? I would go as
we had some drama at the start. We had a bit of battling with Norris coming through the order and a fight over the podium, but it was far from a thriller. The racing wasn't brilliant, and the course of the race up front seemed pretty inevitable after the first corner. Verstappen got the penalty.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the most entertaining for sure, but I think we've seen worse, put it that way. Cool. So before we actually go into the meat and potatoes of the weekend, I want to hand it over to Callum to give us our race rundown.
Yeah, sure. For anyone who didn't catch the race or can't quite remember, I'll give our final finishing order. So Piastri taking his third win of the season, the most race wins from a single driver actually this season. He's done incredibly well. Verstappen very close behind him, P2. Obviously took pole with an amazing lap again on Saturday, but that time penalty that he got, so we'll talk about a little bit later, at turn 1, kind of hampering him down and giving Piastri the eventual advantage. Leclerc with Ferrari's first podium of the season in P3. A brilliant drive for him, given what that Ferrari car still unfortunately is. Lando Norris with what I thought was a very good drive on the Sunday, a very good comeback drive, unfortunately finishing in P10 because of the accident at the start of Q3, but managing to get up to P4 and recover some good points. Then it's an all-Mercedes 5th and 6th place, Russell leading Antonelli, and Hamilton in 7th, who did not look very happy with his weekend in Saudi Arabia, finishing 31 seconds behind his teammate, Leclerc, who obviously got that podium. Sainz and Albon in 8th and 9th, respectively, continuing Williams' amazing starts to the season with another double points finish, meaning that they are currently sitting 5th in the constructors, which is a huge performance from them to the start of the season. And Hadjar rounding out the top 10 with the final point on the board. Alonso narrowly missing out on the points in P11. Lawson in 12th. Then an all-Haas 13th and 14th, Behrman leading Ocon. Then we've got the first of the two Saubers in Hulkenberg. 16th, we have Stroll, which was surprisingly uncharacteristic of what his start to the season has been. He's had a few good races at the start, but back where we might expect him from a couple of seasons ago. Doohan in 17th, Bortoletto being the final finisher of the drivers. And then we had two DNFs, Tsunoda and Gasly, both the results of that first lap incident that saw those two collide as well. But yeah, those are our 20 drivers for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
Thank you, Callum. I guess the best place to start our discussion is what we thought of Piastri's weekend this weekend, because I feel like a bit of a broken record by saying this, but he felt largely in control during the course of that race. I know he was on the track second during that first stint, but I think it looked like, and it probably felt like he had this one in the bag from very early on. What was everyone else's perception of it?
I think I wasn't really given entirely the perception, if I'm honest, that it was Piastri in total control. I think it was Verstappen looked so strong in Saudi Arabia, probably because of the nature of the circuit and because it's more down to the experience and the talent of the actual driver compared to the pace in the car, which brought Verstappen up so much, even though despite that Red Bull car isn't obviously what it was. And it was more that penalty, I think, that Verstappen got on turn 1 of lap 1, which really hampered him. I think if he didn't end up getting that penalty, and maybe it was, I don't know, on another day, perhaps called a racing incident. Obviously, we'll talk about what we thought of the penalty a bit later. But if in a reality where he didn't get that penalty, even if he did lose the start into turn 1 and Piastri did get ahead of him, I thought we would have had a really good battle for the lead. And having that 5 seconds meant that Piastri could get ahead and take control. But I certainly thought that Verstappen was competitive. We saw that with his pole position on the Saturday. So whether Piastri, I think he was slightly lucky that Verstappen did end up getting that penalty. But then, to be fair, that was because he had such an amazing start into turn 1 and he had the corner and he was significantly alongside. But certainly from that point on into turn 1, it was a completely dominant performance, and what we've seen quite frequently of Piastri in this McLaren now. He's really coming to grips with that car, and he's really becoming, not just showing his talent, we got a taste of that last season, but becoming someone who can put in that consistently, and ultimately that's why he's leading the World Championship at the moment. And so, it is really good to be able to see him do that once again.
Yeah, I think the narrative is very quickly becoming that this is Piastri's championship to lose now, kind of, which might be a bit of a stretch maybe, because there's a long way to go. But that seems to be the sentiment, in that he has an iron grip over his competition right now. He put that very assertive move on Verstappen at the start, which we'll get into, and he's outpaced Norris in the first full Grand Prix of the season, and outscored him by, I think the figure's something ridiculous like 33 points in those 4 as well, which is not what Norris wants, to be hemorrhaging those points, and especially to his teammate. So it's been consummate, really, from Piastri. A highlight of his race was certainly that overtake on Hamilton around the outside, a dusty part of the track, when Verstappen was in the pits, sorry. So it was critical for him to get that track position, especially when we saw what Hamilton did with Norris holding him up, the DRS games, So it was critical that Piastri passed him. He did it very decisively, you have to say, which was, it was brilliant to see. Overtake of the month for sure for me. There were a few moments of frustration actually from Piastri. It might be some of the most emotion I've heard him show on the radio was A, when he won the race, and B, when he was being held up by Stroll. I don't know what this was. I think Stroll wasn't getting out of the way in a blue flag because he was battling, I think it was Bortoletto, and the red light on the balcony as well were quite touchy moments for Piastri over the radio. But he's been sublime, really. He's been 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st in the Drivers' Championship after the last 4 races. So no biggie, just on his way to win his first championship in his 3rd season.
Definitely upper hand is the impression I'm getting at the moment. He's obviously taken the lead of the championship from Norris at this weekend as a result of his win and Norris's underperformance. James, I'm going to ask you this. Do you think that Norris is fighting against the odds now? Do you think he is firmly under pressure now to try and claw back an advantage? Because if it continues, the championship continues at the current rate, this could look pretty dominant, right?
I'm not sure Piastri's going to run away with it. I mean, we certainly saw last year, it seemed that Norris was the quicker McLaren driver. I mean, if we exclude Baku last year when Norris got knocked out in Q1 by the yellow flag, then Norris had outqualified Piastri 15 races in a row going into this year. It was clear last year that Norris was still the quicker driver, and yes, he seems to be struggling a bit at the moment, but he's finding the car difficult. He seems to struggle a bit with the pressure of a title battle. We saw that last year with his starts. This year it doesn't seem to be the starts, but the starts have been quite good this year. It's more the qualies, but I wouldn't count out Norris. He's a very good driver, a very talented driver, and he certainly last year had more raw speed than Piastri. So if he could use that to his advantage, and I would not count out Verstappen either. He's Verstappen. He's just capable of working magic out of that Red Bull. He is just consistent. He's up there. He could have easily won here. He did win in Japan. And if Red Bull bring an upgrade, or he's still pretty close behind and up there. And if Red Bull bring an upgrade, or this front wing clamp down in Spain hurts McLaren, then Verstappen is right in there, the championship. So certainly not over yet by any means.
I think even though we obviously are talking about how good Piastri has been, and yes, if you say that he's been the 3-time race winner this season, it does seem that way. But I really don't think that we should count anyone out yet. I mean, Verstappen has been exceptional, I think, and still showing what a great driver he is. And Norris, even though I think for the past few races he really hasn't looked up to his usual self, he's still sitting 10 points behind first place in the championship. And this is a blip in form. He will get back on form, no doubt. And I think on his day, he definitely is the faster driver compared to Piastri. He's got more experience in that McLaren car, and I think he does have maybe a little bit better raw pace. So I really wouldn't count Norris out at the moment, and I think Norris will just be looking to try and turn things around as soon as he can.
My only reply to that would be, we've seen in the past with these drivers who are kind of dubbed future world champions when they come into the first couple of seasons, from the likes of Russell and Norris, and even Tsunoda, who didn't quite have that title, but he was seen as a diamond in the rough kind of. They make these steps up in their third seasons, particularly, that blow some people away because they just don't expect such a step up to match their teammate. Tsunoda in 2023 absolutely decimated De Vries and Ricciardo when he steps into that car. We saw Norris in 2021 working wonders in that midfield, McLaren, and similarly George Russell in that back marker, Williams, with the highlight being that P2 in Spa, obviously. So, maybe this is Piastri's new raw pace, and he has worked over the winter on the areas that he needed to work on from last year, maybe a bit more on the tyre management, qualifying pace, certainly. And he stepped up so much. And now that Norris isn't quite feeling comfortable in that car with his driving style, Piastri is capitalizing because he's made those gains and Norris has made those slight decreases in peak Q3 performance, perhaps, which he was chasing when it led to the crash. So I think it's it could be fair to say that Piastri has kind of climbed to sort of Norris's level, maybe.
I think we were going to get an answer to this over the next 2 or 3 races, I think, because I was looking at over the course of last season. I think for the majority of the European kind of circuit, Norris seemed like he had a slight upper hand. So I think once we return to Europe, Imola and your Imolas, your Monacos, your Spains, I think that's going to be where we see whether Piastri can maintain this kind of very good momentum, as it were. I want to move to like the biggest, I guess, incident of the weekend and the one that sparked most controversy, and that was the first lap incident between Piastri and Verstappen. To kind of refresh people's memory, what happened was Piastri got off the line really well. He started in second. Verstappen got away a little bit slower from pole. Going to turn 1, side by side. Piastri makes the move down the inside, and Verstappen pinned the throttle and essentially skipped turn 2. Played the card of, I was forced off, and eventually got given a 5-second penalty, which he served in the pits. Now, I want to get everyone's kind of feelings towards this. Was the 5-second penalty fair, and do we think the stewards did and acted kind of in the correct way? I'll start with you, James.
To be honest, I think it should have been a 10-second penalty. I mean, Piastri was ahead at the apex, so Piastri had the corner. Ultimately, Piastri won the race the moment he got his car ahead at the apex. He was going to be ahead of the first lap, and also whichever of those two was ahead of the first lap was probably going to win the race. They're pretty similar pace. So whoever was ahead after the first corner was probably going to win the race. So Piastri had his apex ahead, and Verstappen drove off the track to stay ahead, as he did twice in 2021 at the same corner. So really, it was inevitable he was going to get a penalty at that point, really, or have to give back the place. And the fact that he didn't give back the place makes it should have been a 10-second penalty. He could have given the place back, and he didn't.
So what you're saying is they were too lenient on him.
They said they were more lenient because it was turn 1, lap 1, but I mean, he still stayed ahead by going off the track, so I don't see why that should be any less of a penalty, really, than the 10-second. And the reason they brought in the 10-second penalty was to stop people going off the track. Someone who was quicker but stuck behind and just driving off the track to pass someone and then putting 5 seconds down the road. So the reason they put it to stop cynical moves like that. And Verstappen will use every cynical trick in the book. We've seen that before. So I think in terms of the race, I don't think it made that much difference in the end. It's still dropping behind Piastri, but certainly the penalty was deserved because Piastri had the corner and Verstappen stayed ahead by going off the track, which is quite clearly not allowed.
I'm quite surprised, to be honest, that when I saw the incident, that people were saying that it was so clear-cut in Piastri's favour. I have to be honest, because when you look at the incident, I didn't think that Piastri was miles ahead going into the corner. They are side by side. So even though he did a really good job to get by him for the turn 1 apex, he wasn't miles ahead. It's not like Verstappen, because when they turn in, obviously it's a very odd apex, and Piastri is carrying a lot of speed into the corner, and so he can't. It's a question of whether he should make room, really, because Piastri was hitting the apex with his right tyre, which means that Verstappen, there was no more room there. And so, but then was Verstappen significant? I thought Verstappen was maybe significantly alongside Piastri when going into that corner. So I didn't think that it was too much of an incident. I think maybe because maybe the fact that Verstappen was able to just accelerate over the apex, and so Piastri did lose a lot of time by taking the corner. yes, he did maybe gain an advantage, but I don't think that what Verstappen did was necessarily wrong. I mean, he has a right to the corner if he's significantly alongside Piastri, and I thought he was going into that turn.
You know what, Callum? Amen. Amen, because I have seen this so much that people put it down to a traditional historical bias of, oh, it's just Verstappen up to his old tricks, place when he knows he's not going to be able to, right? But I think it's so much less clear-cut than that. I mean, for starters, that's not what the rules, that is in support of the rules. The rules tell us that whichever car is kind of ahead at the apex has the right to the corner and has the right to almost kind of bully the other driver out of room going into that corner, which is what happened, which is what Piastri did to Verstappen, which I don't agree with at all. I don't think the rule book should say that. But, you know, I completely agree with Callum in that Verstappen was well alongside, and I think it's just courteous as a racing driver, right, for Piastri to give him the room that he's earned by getting into that position. I mean, I know you could argue that he's not going to make the corner, whatever he does, but I think it's quite dubious as to whether he was or wasn't making the corner. I've seen telemetry supporting the idea that he was, telemetry supporting the idea that he wasn't. So who knows what would have happened if Piastri had given them the room. Personally, I think he could have. I think he bailed out pretty early because he saw that Piastri wasn't willing to give him that room. And so he was thinking, well, I'm being forced off here. I can't risk a collision because if I'm gonna win this championship, it's gonna be by being consistently on the podium, extracting the most from this car. So I can't risk coming together with him. I need to cut across the track. I need to, and just hope that the stewards deem it that Piastri forced him off. So from that perspective, maybe it was deserved. I think it was a penalty for Verstappen. I do think it was, but I don't think it's so blaringly obvious as everyone seems to think it is. And by the way, those drivers' standards guidelines, which is kind of the rule book on what's right and what's wrong in a wheel-to-wheel racing and overtaking and everything like that, it's not actually publicly available to people. So, a lot of fan analysis or whatever is just a load of speculation. So I think the FIA stewards followed their own rule book to the letter. But
it's crazy that these guidelines aren't public.
I don't think it's fair in this case. I don't think they are, no? The standard, the driver's standard guidelines.
What sport has secret rules? It's ridiculous. I mean, like, how are we supposed to follow along? Ultimately, the job of the stewards is to enforce the rules, but it's ridiculous that we don't know what the rules actually are. I mean, what justification is there for keeping them secret?
Probably so we don't actually question their decisions.
I mean, to be fair,
even though that's not what's going on, because we will always question their decisions.
I mean, I feel football's similar, so I don't necessarily think it's just an F1 thing. Football, I feel, is pretty similar in regards to like penalties, like fouls and VAR and stuff. So I don't think this is let's not pretend this is an F1 exclusive thing.
We need to be able to understand what's going on, or we're going to have all these arguments and debates. And also, reportedly, they said last year they were going to change the guidelines for this year. I can't find any record on whether they've actually been changed or not. So we don't even know if the rules have been changed since last year or not, which is ridiculous. So we don't actually know what rules are being judged by and whether ultimately Piastri had the right to run him off the road or not.
And the FIA, after 2021, they had their internal investigation and they were like, okay, we're going to be a lot more transparent with everyone in the future as to what our decisions are, why we've made them. But, keeping these documents, they're not helping themselves in their own case, really. The FIA, they seem very almost self-destructive in this unwillingness to kind of cooperate with the teams and with the fans. They seem so uncompromising, and it's hurting the kind of almost the integrity of what's going on track at the end of the day. But anyway, we've strayed quite far off topic, but that's what I made of the incident.
I mean, I'm of the view that it was I felt the penalty was deserved. I'm kind of surprised the stewards took so long. That's something I didn't like. I'm surprised they didn't tell him to swap position during the safety car, because I felt they had the complete ample time to do so. And so I think they should have done that. That's my one complaint, the speed at which they made that decision. It should have been a bit quicker.
Take them particularly long. I mean, it was just after the restart they announced it. They should have just told them through over the radio. Maybe they were having worries about a repeat of 2021 with Verstappen letting people through here. And we're looking at the steward's document. The steward's document says, based on the driver's standards guidelines, it was Piastri's corner and he was entitled to be given room. Verstappen left the track and gained a lasting advantage that was not given back. He stayed in front of Piastri and sought to build on the advantage, it says in the steward's document. On why they gave the penalty.
I mean, we can argue this all day long in terms of driver standards and stuff like that, but that's going to be it. That could take up a whole episode. So let's swiftly move on to a couple of the other things that kind of happened over the course of the weekend. I want to touch on Lando Norris because we were talking about last week about the pressure that he has, the pressure he's put on himself, and I don't think he's done himself any favors over the course of this weekend because in a qualifying session that he was probably one of the favourites, if not the favourite, to go on pole position. He wins it in Q3, starting from 10th, and from that point, it was very difficult for him to be in race contention. He did ultimately do a good job to recover, I think. But what do we think this is, again, symptomatic of the pressure he's under and potentially him not being ready to win a championship or at least go in a championship fight?
I don't think we should count him out. Yeah, I don't think we should be doing that at all. Really, I mean, he's all that's happened. I think is he's just hit a bit of bad form. And to be fair, I do sympathise with him quite a bit because he was the favourite for this championship before coming into the season. We knew that McLaren was most likely going to have the dominant car. They have. We didn't probably expect Piastri to make this much of a jump over the off season. So we probably all thought that it was going to be between Lando Norris and Verstappen, but we thought that the Rebel car wasn't going to be good enough to challenge the McLarens, or we underestimated the ability of Max Verstappen because, to be fair, it hasn't been good and Verstappen has still been challenging. But I think he's been put under maybe a lot of pressure from that point of view. Perhaps a bit like Hamilton as well, because there was a lot of hype with him coming into Ferrari and what he could do, and this talk of an 8th world title, even though Ferrari were not looking like the fastest car. And so maybe it's a similar case with this, with Norris, because he was the favourite coming into the season. He was feeling a lot of pressure. And he's still Lando Norris. We still know what he's capable of. And we should not discount the incredible performances that he put in last season. Even when McLaren weren't expecting to challenge for any sort of championship, the drivers or the constructors. Lando Norris still did incredibly well and had a really good season, all things considered. And I don't think we should take the last few races to draw conclusions about what his form is going to be like from here on out. I do think he will recover. It's just a question of how quickly he can recover from what he's in now, because with how strong Piastri is looking for this season, it could be very unforgiving for Lando Norris for this small blip that he's had in his performances. Because like we said on Sunday, he did very well. It was just that small split-second moment decision that he made in qualifying, which ultimately compromised the entire weekend. So I don't think we should... I'm not doubting his ability or anything like that. It's just, when is he going to be able to get back on the form that we know he can get to challenge Piastri for those race wins?
I certainly think he will be back contending for wins very soon, maybe even as soon as Miami. But my only concern is that those kinds of silly mistakes, the Q3 crash, he was just wide on the entry. He didn't really, there wasn't any mitigating circumstances there. He just kind of missed the apex and then put the throttle on over the curb, and it spat him into the wall, which kind of put paid to his weekend. And he was looking so quick as well, all through practice and qualifying. He looked like he could challenge Piastri and Verstappen for the top steps. So it's just such a shame to see the recovery drive that he had to put on, and he was made to look a fool in while he was racing Hamilton as well. I mean, surely the DRS chicken is one of the first things mentioned in the Sunday briefing before the race of what to expect when you're on a recovery drive, when you're going through cars who are slightly slower, but still want to keep you behind for the good of their race and not to get that dirty air. So I think it was just such a shame that, he didn't notice really what Hamilton was doing until a couple of laps later when it was too late. And that could have potentially cost him the podium position as well. I mean, I would have loved him to get that, because then that would mean that I got my top 4 right in my predictions, but I didn't. And that might be because Hamilton was holding him up. So, it's a shame. It is really, because we know Norris has front running pace, and he has for a long time now. And he's finally got the car to show it, but it's not quite coming together. So I'm looking forward to Miami to see what this week off has done for him. It's been a pretty terrible triple header so far, but if there's anywhere that I think he could pick his form up, it'll be Miami, with the good memories and the track that seems to suit him as a whole. So looking forward to that from his perspective.
I'm interested. I'm intrigued to see the reaction to the Hamilton DRS chicken game, because I understand why people are so annoyed at it, but at the same time, I'm willing to let it go in some way. Like, I think in truth, how many laps was he behind Hamilton? 3 or 3? Like, can't have been more than 5, right? And you're also going against Lewis Hamilton, who's played these games before as well. So I'm willing to kind of excuse that. I do think sooner rather than later, it'll get to a point where some of these mistakes that he's making will become inexcusable. So let's say he's making the same mistake that he made in Saudi qualifying later in the season. So for the sake of argument, back it. I don't think that's a place where you should. By that point, that's pretty problematic to have an error like that. I think it's easier to have it earlier in the season, because there's more time for you to kind of recover. Do we think? I guess we've heard from both Callum and Daniel here. James, do you think that Norris will come back here? Do you think he'll return stronger?
I think he will. I mean, he is a very good driver. I mean, what's Piastri got now? A 10-point lead. Well, these things can change very quickly, remember. I mean, Piastri lost an awful lot of points in Australia in that spin. It only takes something like that to happen again. Or you see how quickly leads can change. I mean, Verstappen was 46 points behind after 3 races in 2022. 3 races later, he was leading the championship. Verstappen had a 33 points lead going 2 races in 2021. So leads can change quickly. Norris could bounce back. I mean, people have made worse errors and still won the championship. Notably, Hamilton crashing into the back of Raikkonen in the pit lane in Canada in 2008, and effectively ruining 2 races, going to place a penalty for the next race, and still winning the championship. So, I mean, people have made worse errors and still won championships. I mean, all drivers make mistakes. Some drivers make more than others. Ultimately, to win the championship, you need to try and not make as few mistakes as possible, at the same time as being quick. And Norris clearly does struggle a bit with the pressure of a championship battle. We saw that a bit last year when the championship might be on. But it is a long season. We're only 5 races in. We still got 19 races to go. It's very early days. Who knows what's going to happen over the course of a season? So it's certainly, he may well bounce back from this and push Piastri all the way, particularly if he does have a natural speed advantage that is going to be helpful. I mean, if it's the 2 McLarens up front, you'd think most of the time, almost all the time, the driver who gets the first corner in front is going to win the race if it's just between the 2 McLarens. So ultimately, if you can take pole and keep the lead at the start, then if he's got more speed than Piastri, then he should be able to get back into this.
I guess we will wait and see whether Norris can pick his form back up at the Miami Grand Prix. But what I want to kind of pivot quickly before we go into the predictions and seeing who came out on top there, I wanted to touch on the performance of the Williams team, because in Jeddah, they were able to achieve a double points finish with Carlos Sainz leading Albon in that type of battle. Do we all think this is a really refreshing return to performance and return to kind of form for Williams, for a team that's been in the dumps for so long? Does everyone have that kind of feel-good factor around it?
Williams, I'm just so happy with at the moment. And I think James Vowles, he's at the wheel, and like I think, but just to give an example, there was a video that I've seen online where like not only has Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz been given permission to use the toilet in James Vowles' office for some reason, and also James Vowles has a picture of both of them on his desk. It's kind of a weird relationship between them two, if you think about it. But the atmosphere at Williams just seems so much better than what it was a couple of years ago, because and it shows from the results, and you know that happy feeling will lead to the results, and the results will lead to more confidence and more happiness for the drivers and the people working there. So it really does seem, I'm hoping, like this is more of what we can expect from Williams rather than I guess what we might have got last season, for example, which is just kind of more freak performances or maybe a bit of luck going their way. Hopefully this is the thing we can now expect from Williams, because it's been so many seasons where we've just expected absolutely nothing from them, and there's good reason for that. It's because their car has been awful, but now they've got a car which is actually workable, which actually has decent pace. Sainz has maybe not had the ideal start to the season. He certainly seems to be getting into the rhythm of using that Williams car now, and Albon is on as great form as he always has been. So I'm very happy for Williams. They look to be on some really good form, and I hope these good performances continue for the rest of the season to come, because it's worked out very well for them so far.
Callum, what you said about the Williams drivers and James having a kind of weird relationship kind of reminded me of Drive to Survive, when James was kind of chasing after Carlos Sainz, and it got quite personal, and he made a quote about how he ends up in a hotel room, which is really weird. So yeah, I agree. But they do look, they do seem like they're a tight knit bunch, aren't they? It's like
they really are, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could say. But yeah, it's been great to see Williams' performance, not just in the context of their past few years, but also in the context of just this season alone. I mean, I'd argue we've had 4 different teams as best of the rest in the first 4 races of the year, really. We had Williams in Australia, Haas's resurgence in China, RB in Japan, Racing Bulls in Japan, and then Alpine came to the fore in the next race in Bahrain. So I think it's good that we've got kind of a variety going on there in the positions behind the top 4 teams. But I'm quite glad that Williams are winning out on that one, because they deserve something good after their years of turmoil that they've had in the past half decade to a decade or so. So their best points haul in many years, I believe, in the first 5 rounds of the season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we've got, especially with Carlos Sainz's pace coming on strong now, beating Albon, obviously, and using those Singaporean flashback tactics that we saw from Sainz as well, to keep Albon behind him to kind of ward off Hadjar. So I like to see that good teamwork from them.
I think it's go for it.
Yeah, it's going very well for Williams so far. I mean, Sainz seems to be finding his feet. He had a bit of a difficult start, but he was settling into a new team and a new car, and he seems to have found his rhythm now. 8th and 9th was good. Great teamwork with Sainz giving Albon the DRS toe. May well have allowed them to keep the quicker Hadjar behind. He was clearly quicker than them. But it's going pretty well for Williams. They've got a good driver lineup. Surprisingly, they've actually importantly become the first team to have switched their wind tunnel entirely over to 2026, which is interesting. Although they still might have some upgrades which are already developed for this year. Interesting. But I think it bodes well for them for the future. I mean, they've got a very strong driver lineup. They've got a Mercedes, a team clearly on with a positive trajectory. They've got Mercedes engine for next year, and it's rumor seems to be believed in the paddock that Mercedes engine might be quite significantly the fastest next year, like in 2014. In which case, I can quite plausibly see Williams. I don't think they're quite in a position to challenge for a world championship. I can plausibly see them next year being like 2014, 2015, being third in the championship if the Mercedes engine really is that good and getting lots of podiums. I think that's really the maximum level they could get to. But I think that's only plausible for next year if the Mercedes engine really is the best of them. So they're in a great position, and they're doing well this year. They're 5th in the constructors now. yeah, things are looking good for them.
Indeed, it is. Cool. Let's move on to our predictions from last week and see how well some of us have done. Now, Lucy's not with us on this pod, but I have got her kind of predictions on me now. So, without further ado, we'll have a look, and we might have a few more discussions as we go through them. So, let me start with Lucy's top 5 prediction and poll. She predicted a George Russell pole, which obviously didn't happen. I felt Mercedes weren't necessarily here this weekend. It feels like they weren't really present. Did anyone else get the same kind of impression out of them?
I think they were maybe in a very lonely third pace, which I think kind of has been the case for them a lot in prior to this season. In the earlier stages of the season, obviously they haven't really had the pace to challenge Verstappen or McLaren, but then they've been ahead, firmly ahead of the Ferraris until recently with an incredible performance, I think, from Leclerc. But I think if we're not talking about them too much, is kind of a good thing, because it means that they haven't gotten to too many incidents. Both drivers have had clean racing, and they've just kind of kept themselves. At the end of the day, they've got a 5th and a 6th place, which I think is a decent performance, I'd say, from Mercedes, as you can expect that both McLaren drivers and Verstappen are going to be ahead of them.
Yeah, it felt like a little bit of an anonymous race from their end, but I guess they did pick up the points, which is ultimately the main goal. So Lucy predicted a Russell pole and then decided to go for a Piastri win, which she got 3 points for because Piastri obviously won. She was pretty high on Mercedes, at least in Russell's hands, as she put him second. That didn't happen. Then put Verstappen in third when he finished second, so that's an extra point. Lucy also said Norris in P4, which did happen, so another 3 points there, and put Leclerc in 5th, who obviously finished not in 5th, so no points there. Cool. Daniel, do you want to go through your predictions then?
Okay, let's see. So you can start pole position. Oscar Piastri lost out on that by 100th of a second, which isn't painful at all. P1, Oscar Piastri. So that one came in, which is good. P2 was Max Verstappen. Saw it coming. The pace of the Red Bull was bound to be better in Saudi, and that's how it was. P3 and P4, I got the wrong way around. I put Norris P3 and Leclerc P4, which obviously was 1 place away from each other. Didn't quite expect Ferrari to be as good as they were, but there we are. I'm happy to see that. P5 was a bit of a wild card. I think I regret my choice during the podcast, and I still regret it now. It was Yuki Tsunoda, P5, which absolutely didn't come in. Maybe we'll touch on the incident. Let me just get the other 2 out of the way, because I didn't get any points. I put Doohan as a DNF, and my random prediction was that there's going to be a DNS, which didn't nearly come in at all, really. I mean, well, retiring on lap 1 is probably the closest thing you can get to a DNS, but that didn't happen. But just on that Tsunoda Gasly incident, was it? You guys might remember, was it Gasly last year who was the one driver to have no crash damage for the whole year? Was
Yes.
that him?
Yeah,
and
he
now
won.
this year he's come in and obviously he's been driving pretty well, but that incident was I think quite clumsy from Gasly. I don't know what you guys thought, but I'm not sure that move was entirely on.
It's definitely a tough place to overtake, right? So I feel it is definitely one of them where you can chalk up to a first lap incident for sure. If I was personally thinking it was more clumsy on Yuki's end, but in truth, I think it's very much there's nothing in there in truth. So it's definitely a racing incident from my perspective. I guess I'm going to ask you, James. Do you feel the same way as me, or do you think Gasly was a little bit over eager to make that overtake happen?
I think it's a racing, so I need to watch it back again, to be honest. I wasn't quite sure at the time. It's hard to tell. I mean, they're both battling through what's a difficult place to overtake. It wasn't the most sensible place to overtake, but it was probably a racing incident, yeah.
Callum, do you have the same opinion?
Yeah, I think kind of in my view, when looking, at least, I think, to be fair, I could do with seeing Gasly's on board, but I did see Tsunoda's on board, and if anything, it was more Tsunoda, because I think it was him who his tyre that crashed into the side of Gasly, perhaps from carrying a bit too much speed into that second chicane, being a bit too eager. But I don't think there's not really much I don't think either of them could have done. It was such it's a chicane where you're trying to get through about 6 cars at once in the midfield, and it's really not a surprise if 2 of them do come together. If anything, it's a miracle if none of them do happen to collide. So I think racing incident is fine. The stewards certainly didn't seem too bothered to look into that one, and I think that's fair enough.
Cool. Let's move on to my top 5 and poll. I said a Norris poll. Did not happen. In fact, he binned it in qualifying 3, so that didn't happen. For the race, I did predict a Piastri victory, though, so those are 3 points coming my way. I put a Norris second. Unfortunately, his recovery wasn't that good, so he finished in 4th, and no points there. Verstappen, I said, finished at 3rd. That's an extra point on my end. I put Russell in 4th, and I believe he finished 5th, so that's a point there. And I put Lewis Hamilton in 5th, and from my memory, he finished in 7th, so no points there. I want to touch on this quickly before we round out the show and go through the last couple of predictions. Hamilton looked almost in a way, very downbeat in every single post-session interview I saw. He finished over a pit stop behind his teammate Leclerc, who finished in 2nd. And there's quite a lot of noise about how he was struggling to adapt to the car. He said that he needed a brain transplant to try and adapt to this car quicker. Are we worried or concerned about some of the noises that he's making this early on into his Ferrari kind of tenure?
Worried or concerned? I think both, personally. Brain transplant, wow, that is a strong choice of words, isn't it? But to be honest, naturally he is getting older, right? There's no hiding away from it. Lewis Hamilton, he's into his 40s. He's not getting any younger, and as a result of that, obviously he has lower, from a biological and psychological standpoint, he's got lower brain plasticity than the likes of Kimi Antonelli, for example, which means that jumping into a new situation and adapting to it is not going to be as easy as it was when he was younger, because the rearrangement of all his faculties is going to take a lot longer to take hold and to enact those changes than he'd like. I'm sure he's working on it. He's he was flying under the radar this year, but I think that performance, being so far off Leclerc as far as he was, which was about 30 seconds or so, that's attention grabbing, and that's going to be a few headlines that are being written about that, and possibly the issues that are going on there. And when he comes out with comments like needing a brain transplant as well, it seems quite serious. I'd love to see him get on top of it. Obviously, I think everyone would, but I don't think it's going to be straightforward. And he's probably already looking to next year and seeing how he can contribute to that car and make it more drivable for himself too.
It's definitely a hard listen, right? How about you, Callum? What were you thinking about it?
I just with Daniel mentioning that he thinks that Lewis Hamilton's gone quite under the radar quite a bit this season, and I'd have to agree, not only because the Ferrari car hasn't been up to standard or of what we thought it could be and not fighting at the front, but also just because he hasn't really had any freak performances. He hasn't really gotten any massively good performances. He hasn't really got any podiums, but at the same time, he hasn't dropped back outside the points at all. He's just kind of been in that 5th to 7th region, and I think this race was maybe the most freak performance out of the bunch, not only because he just seemed bogged down in P7, but also probably highlighted because of the fact that Leclerc was able to do so well and get that podium. So I don't think it is too concerning at the moment. I think this is the only performance where you could say he's done particularly bad compared to his teammate. But I don't think it's massively a cause for concern. I think the Ferrari car still needs to improve, frankly, because it's not like Leclerc is consistently getting podiums or consistently getting up there. He's not. This is the first podium that Ferrari have had this season. And so I think it's sure, yeah, you might want a bit of a break to just give him that extra bit of time to adapt to the car. But I still think I'm not too concerned at the moment. I think Ferrari should be more concerned maybe with their car than of Hamilton's performances at the moment.
Cool. We're gonna have to hope and pray that he comes back to form, because I don't think it's a particularly good look for us as a sport. It's not nice to see him struggle that much. I'm gonna whiz through the rest of the predictions. Yes, you go ahead, James.
I think we shouldn't forget. I mean, he didn't win the sprint in China. Let's not forget that.
That's true.
To Ferrari, settling into a new car. Yes, he was lacking some pace in Jeddah, but the car hasn't been brilliant this year. He does seem to be struggling a bit in the ground effect era generally with these cars. He's getting a bit older, but hasn't seen quite the same drive as before. But he is still very early days at Ferrari, and he did win the sprint in Jeddah. He's not like he's miles off Leclerc. It's not like the gap between Verstappen and his teammates. But it's still early days.
Yeah, it is admittedly pretty early to make some of these conclusions, but we're just saying what we see in truth. I'm going to whiz through the last bits of these predictions and close off the show, because I don't think any of us were successful with our DNF or random predictions across the board here, because Lucy said that Liam Lawson would DNF, and that did not happen. He finished in 12th, so that obviously did not occur. And she also said there'll be a black and orange flag at some point in the race, and I don't think that happened either. So no points there. Daniel, you mentioned you put do and DNF, and there will be a did not start. Unfortunately, neither of those things happened. And then from my end, I thought Lance Stroll would DNF. He didn't DNF. He's just not a good driver, so he was nowhere near it. And my wild prediction was that we had 5 collisions into turn 1. And that just didn't happen. In truth, I don't remember any proper contact, really. There's a lot of evasive action, I guess, but no real collisions, and definitely not 5 of them. So no points there.
You know why there wasn't any contact?
You go. Why?
It's because of the design of the first corner. I'm sorry, I know you're wrapping up, but I just want to quickly cover it. I watched the F2 sprint on Saturday, and Gabriele Mini was absolutely abusing that first corner runoff. I think he cut through it about 6 times in a 20-lap race, which is very impressive. I mean, I think there needs to be some sort of counter kind of deterrent to stop the drivers from cutting it, to be honest, because it was getting a little bit ridiculous, especially in the feeder series, like I mentioned. I just think it's messy. I don't know what the solution is. You don't want to put a wall there. That seems a bit dangerous. A bit of gravel, but then the drivers have gravel on their tires when they come out of the corner, and they could be losing grip. So I don't know, but they just need to fix it, because I didn't enjoy watching that.
There's got to be some type of deterrent. Maybe even those sausage curbs that are on the runoff. Maybe that's an option, but there has to be some type of deterrent, because it was kind of it wasn't exactly. There's no real punishment for them really for running off. But that brings us to the end of our review for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. We will see you at some point. We will be previewing the Miami Grand Prix in the US. So until next time, that's the next time we're going to see you. So until then, thank you very much for listening or watching, and I hope we hear from you guys then. Goodbye.